but yeah, hopefully you all hear me. Monitoring the chat for the first minute or two, just to make sure everyone can see what I'm doing and hear me as well. So yeah, we'll wait a little bit, and then we are gonna do a quick recap of what has been done last week, what we're gonna focus on today. But before that, as I told you, I wanna wait a little bit just to make sure everyone managed to connect, hear me, and see what I'm doing. So let's wait a little bit. Let me know if the sound is not loud enough or if there is any issue before I get started with the topic of the day. So I'm gonna wait a little more. And yeah, probably in 1 minute or so, I will get started. So please let me know if there is any issue. On my side, it looks okay. It works on my machine. But yeah, hopefully it will work for you too, watching the stream and chat. So I'm monitoring the chat as well. So far, no complaints. No complaints. So, okay, I will get started. And again, feel free to interrupt. I'm gonna watch the chat carefully at the same time. So first of all, thank you for joining. Bonjour, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks, Mohammed, for the comment. I'm happy it works fine. If you hear me well, that's perfect as well. Hopefully, I managed to tweak my settings a little bit compared to last week. So the ambient noise is hopefully filtered out. So the sound is a bit of a better quality, I hope. And so without further ado, let's get started. So last week, what we started to do is take this realworld.io thing, which is actually a set of API specs that are implemented for both the backend and frontend in different languages and technologies. So you've got an example, as you can see here, there are a bunch of technologies used for the frontend, a bunch for the backend, and you can basically mix and match those as you want. And so what we started last week is try to start building a backend with Neo4j and the Golang driver. And what happens, so if you go through the documentation of realworld.io, you will see that there is a link to the API spec, which is actually a Postman collection of API calls. And that's what we've been using to guide our implementation. I mean, at least API per API. And so last week we were focusing on, well, the first one, which is we need to start somewhere, right? So yeah, we started and we're still not done with the register endpoint. And my thoughts on Node.js, well, I think it's a great technology, but sadly today I will be focusing on Golang, not Node.js. But I would be happy definitely to try the JavaScript driver for our next session and show you how it works, maybe how similar it is to the experience with Golang and how idiomatic it can be also in pure Node.js, because the idea of the driver in general, no matter what the language is the concepts are the same. So we try to have a uniform concept surface, but also have an idiomatic experience. So those are a bit in tension, but we're doing the team is doing its best to provide the best experience in every language. And so yeah, Node.js I've done a lot of Node.js in the past. I've also tried the JavaScript driver. I actually am working on a tiny project for internal monitoring based on the JavaScript driver and written in Node.js. So yes, I've used it a little bit in the past. So thanks for the question. Hopefully that answered it. And feel free to ask more questions while we're at it. As I said, I'm carefully monitoring the chat. And thank you for saying I look young. Especially when I'm not shaved. That's quite an unusual comment. But let's get started then. So Real-world.io, as I said, API specs, a lot of APIs. I'm not gonna cover all of them for the live stream. I will maybe do one more part after this, maybe a little more, we'll see. But yeah, just to give you a feel of how it works. So what we're focusing on, as last week and today, is this register endpoint, where we have so the content type, and then the body is interesting. So we post a new account with email, password, and username, and we're supposed to store it. And in our case, store it in Neo4j, right? Because that's the whole point of the stream, is to show how the new Golang Neo4j driver works and how we can use it to store information in Neo4j. All right, so yeah, we have a post register to /users. We want to register a user with an email, password, and username. So that's our mission today. We'll continue what we started last week. So let's dive into the code. So last week we started from scratch. So as you can see right now, we have a Go module project with simple dependencies. All of them for now, as you can see, there is no driver yet. So we'll get to that point real soon. But basically, there is all the testing infrastructure in place. And we started with the register handler. So the register handler, I mean, currently I'm not using any frameworks. I'm just using the built-in HTTP server. So you can adapt that to your needs and your preferences. I just, picked the most obvious candidate. And what I'm doing basically is reading, unmarshal it into user registration, which is username, email, password, as we've seen in Postman. And then register user and send a response back with the username and email, just to confirm that the user has been registered. So that HTTP part, that controller part in MVC term, model view controller terms, is done. However, we were just barely scratching the surface of the driver, and as a proof, there is no driver yet in the dependencies with the registration. So as you can see, registration for now, there is actually nothing, just a simple interface. There is no implementation. And that's where we were at last week. So last week, let me see, that's my bad. That's the test, the repository test. That's what I wanted to show, my bad. Register test is for the HTTP part. So that part is, for the happy path, at least it's done. Let's focus. We're also gonna focus on the happy path. I'm not gonna try to handle all the edge cases in the live stream, because that's not the most interesting parts that I will do offline. And so for the user repository, we've seen the interface, and we were in the middle of setting up test containers. So test containers, if you don't know, is so it's a project popular in the Java world, but I think it works quite well in as well in Go. So here is the main page for the Java container stuff, but it also works well with Golang, that's why I decided to use it. So basically what it allows me to do is to start a container. So in that case, a Neo4j container, because as you may know, Neo4j maintains official Docker images. So we can just use them to start them for testing. So the only hard dependency, is that you must have a running Docker daemon running on your machine, which means that usually you have Docker desktop installed. It's the most common setup. So here we just say, hey, I want this image. So we can also, later I will also be able to configure that to a specific image version. For now, I'm just using latest. I want to expose the bold port. I want a specific username, password, and I want to wait for this specific log to consider that the container is ready. So all of that is built in. I just declare what I want, and then I start it. And when it's started, then I can start to get the address, configure the driver, and test the repository. So that's the idea here, is to start a real Neo4j in a Docker container when the test starts, and then we'll be able to test whatever we want to test. In our case, that would be to make sure that when we call register user, in the end we end up with the user in the database. And we'll do that in several passes, right? I'm probably not gonna get this right at first, but let's see. So for now, what I'm doing, I just want to make sure, the setup with test container works. The test is not complete yet. And one important thing to know as well is the test container does not allow static port configuration. So Here in the container, I say I want to map this internal port, this 7687, which is a ball port. But what test container will do, it will map it to a random port on your machine. So it's important to get this random port programmatically so you can get the full address. You cannot guess it in advance. You have to do it like this. You have to get the mapped port. So the local port on your machine that is mapped to the ball port of the container. You have to do it like this. There is no other way. And so let's see if it works. So for now, I'm just gonna focus on that specific test. I don't want to run the other test. And let's see what happens. Hopefully I should see an address. I should see a few logs for the test container starting. And I should see an address, and then the test will stop, and the test container will stop as well. So yeah, it's a bit big, but hopefully you can see the most important part. All right. So there is, of course, a slow test warning because those test containers is meant for integration test. Don't use it in your unit test because it would be just too slow. So that's why we also don't want to have too many tests written in that way. It's quite convenient, but it's slow, so we don't want to have gazillions of tests. One way also is to make sure at least one per package to start the container only once, but then you have to clean up between every test. So that's also another way to try to amortize the cost of the container startup time. But yeah, as you can see, it found the image Neo4j, so it was already in my cache because I already started it before. Also, you can see there is also a second image actually that is started first, which is this Ryuk image here. It's basically some kind of garbage collector. Whenever the image Neo4j here in our test is not used anymore, it will automatically stop it and remove it. So that's why there is always two images at least when you start test container. And so, okay, and we can see that we got the actual address that I'm going to use to configure my repository and register users. So feel free, if something is not clear, to ask on the chat. Otherwise, I will just continue. So what I want to do in that case, so I've got an address. I will probably need some kind of client because so far, if I also, hopefully it won't take too much space, but let's do it like this. Or maybe actually, let's move it down rather, sorry, because I don't have much width right now. Yeah, let's do it like this for now. What I probably want is to be able to configure a driver directly when I instantiate a client. So I will probably need something like I don't know. Let's say something like this, a repository that will accept a driver, but then for that I will need to implement. So probably something like this. However, I need to import it. So you have several ways, in Golang to do it. The source of truth is usually the imports of your source code. And that will be reflected on your Go mod file. But you can also do it the other way around. You can first add the dependencies through go get, and it will be added to your Go mod, and then you can import it. Any way works. So in my case, I'm just gonna do it manually like this. Sorry. I want to use the pre-release of the driver. So it's not available yet in v4, so which is the latest version of the drivers. It's not available yet as a general stable release. There is pre-releases, alpha releases that you can try. That's what I'm going to do now. So here I'm just going to say sync dependencies. And hopefully it will do the right thing for me. So we found it. And yes, and there is a driver. The driver is an interface. So yeah, that's exactly what I want. So I could go the unit test route. I could mock the driver and then mock the session and then mock the, etc., etc. But for conciseness sake and for time's sake, I'm just gonna do the integration test right now, which is usually the best way anyway to test interactions with Neo4j, I would say. I mean, in my experience at least. So all right, so now I have these structs that I can actually use. So let's see. I've got a repository, if I can type, which is not a given this morning. So I've got this user Neo4j repository, and I want to give it a driver. So, oh, tiny mistake. As you may know in Golang, if something starts with a lowercase letter, it's private. In my case, I don't want. I'm just gonna do it public. I could keep it private and expose a function, some kind of a constructor, but let's keep it simple for now. And what I want to do is instantiate a driver here. The target being the address. And then I want also to configure, so username password, in which case are hard-coded in this test. As you can see here and here, it's used when I create my container. I override it through the configuration mechanism in place for the Docker image. And so I need basically to create the credentials with this. So in my case, I'm just using basic auth. I'm not using anything else. So let's do this. Password. And once it's reformatted, hopefully it will make a little more sense. And let's see what happens. So what am I missing here? Oh yeah, of course there could be an error. So I cannot do that directly. And I'm also missing something here, I believe, which is a realm, which is empty in my case. So first, let's get the driver. If something goes wrong, hopefully not. And we're in a test, so we can directly test it a bit similar to here. And have an explicit message, so it's a bit easier to troubleshoot if anything goes wrong. And obviously, and I will change it a bit afterwards, but for now, let's just do it like this, okay? But as you can see, Golang warns me. So I'm going to close this for a second, because the close could itself return an error. So what we can do instead of ignoring the error when we defer is introduce a tiny function. So as you may know, everything that got a close method with no argument implicitly implements the interface called closer, io.closer. So we can do something like this, like a tiny utility method that I use quite often, with just an explicit message saying, so I'm calling close on any closer. So in that case, a driver is an IO closer as well, because it's got a close method, and say, oh, this resource should close, and something is wrong if it does not. And yeah, so hopefully I can instead now do something like this. And the advantage is that the error is managed, basically, because close returns an error, and I'm explicitly checking against it. So this time there is no more warning. Just a tiny tip when you deal with defer, when you defer to something that is executed at the end of the scope, you can always do this kind of things instead of ignoring errors. All right, so almost there. So I mean, we're almost halfway through what we want to do here. So repository, if I look at the interface again, so if I go back here, I should call register user. So obviously, currently, there is no such thing. So it will complain, but I like to write code, express my intention before implementing everything. And register users takes a user. So let's see. So username will be, I don't know, it could be some user. I'm not very imaginative today. Some user. Yeah, I still cannot type today. I'm sorry about that. And secret, because I like, oh, you know what? Maybe let's change, not to confuse the credentials of the container and this. And then what should happen afterwards is I can query against Neo4j. So I'm gonna be a bit how can I say, a bit imprecise at first, because I'm not exactly sure how the encrypted password is gonna look like. So I'm just gonna make an imprecise query for now. So what do I want to do? I want to create a session with an empty session config for now. Okay. So that gives me a session or an error. For now, it's a test, so it's kind of okay to ignore errors. I mean, it's not the best way. It will probably crash if there is a problem, but it's not production code, right? Then, same as before, you can actually you can call close on session. So I'm just going to reuse my little utility here, just to say, hey, session should close. If not, there is an issue. And then we can use transaction functions. So that's a recommended way to run Cypher queries with the drivers. Basically, you give a callback that will be executed possibly several times if there is a need to retry in case of errors, and that is transparently managed for you. So that's why we highly recommend using transaction functions. If you see anywhere in the documentation something else like session.run or these kind of things, please raise an issue, please talk to us, reach out to us, and we will fix the documentation. We really want to emphasize transaction functions as much as possible. And if you look at this transaction work type, let's see. So yeah, the box showed up. It's just an alias, basically. It's a type alias. So it's just a function that takes a transaction, returns any type, basically. That's like object in Java, or that's the most common type, or an error if something goes wrong. And so let's do this. And Golang is kind enough to have the job for me. And of course, here you can either get a result or an error. And we will check later that the result is something. But let's first do the transaction. So through this callback, let me try maybe to move it here so we can see a little bit better. I've got access now to a transaction object that is automatically passed to me. I can finally run this query. So in my case, what I want to do, I've not implemented anything yet, so I'm quite free to do what I want. We want users. So probably a node with a label user. We probably want to match on at least, username. And let's say email. And return. So let me try to keep it in one screen. And then what we want to do, we want to return. I mean, I'm just gonna do it like this. There is a shorter way to do this, but right now I don't remember. So let's do it the verbose way for now. As password. And so I've got my query. I've got parameters. So even if you don't have any parameters, you must give an empty map for now. But actually here, I'm happy because I actually need parameters, which is username at the very least. So username, which will be this one. So let me reuse it. And the email as well, sorry. So username, password. Oops, except it's email. I don't want the password of the container. Okay. So here, and again, so use parameterized queries whenever you can. Don't use string interpolation. So for this kind of lookup, definitely use parameters query. Just, you've got this new $ syntax that was introduced in Neo4j 4. Before it was something with curly braces, I think, something like this. So it's not supported anymore, but there is an explicit error if you use the old syntax. So yeah, that's the new syntax. And yeah, use parameters whenever you can. because then even if the username and email is different and the query plan is cached, it's more efficient and it's more secure as well because it escapes value for you, and you don't want to deal with cipher injections or this kind of security issues. So yeah, in that case, it's a perfect use case for using parameters through the map, as you can see, because run takes two parameters, the query or the query template and the parameters. Cool. So that gives me something that gives me either a raw result or an error. So yeah, maybe not the best naming choices, but we'll get back to that. So I'm gonna write I should have a shortcut for this. I don't think I have it right now. No, I should add it at some point because that's something we have to type quite a lot. But as you can see, the right transaction, I cannot talk. The transaction function signature is to either return a result or an error. So in that case, if there is a problem with the query, I definitely want to return an error. So I've got no result, so nil, but I've got this particular query error, so I'm just gonna return it like that. And in turn, I will retrieve it here if something wrong happens. So I'm not dealing really with error handling here. I will do it at the top level. And what else? So now I expect a single result here. Anyways, database is only used by this test at the moment, so there is no interference possible. So I'm going to be a bit sloppy and yeah, and just use this rest single. That will give me a record, which is like the row type matching every result. So I've got this single record. I could get an error. An error would happen if I have 0 or more than 1 result. Hopefully that won't be the case, but you know, just because we like to write if error different from nil, I'm just gonna write it because I enjoy it so much. And then what can I do? Then I will have to return some kind of user. So let's do this. The old fields sounds good. So I want a single record. Let's see how I can do this. Let me see real quick. So values is just a list. So I'm gonna be a bit sloppy here as well because you know the first one is username. I could do it in a different way, I think, but so what does it give me? It gives me. So of course there is no generics in Golang, right? So we are kind of stuck with doing typecasts, etc. So yeah, let's see what we do with that. And then I should have something very similar in all cases, except I will expect probably something like a byte array or something for the password. We'll see. So it's still complaining because I'm probably missing something, not enough argument to return. Yes, of course, because I want a user or no error. And here it's not happy. Oh yeah, password is supposed to be, okay. So in that case, I expect the row storage to be byte array. So I'm gonna convert that a bit sloppily here again to a string. We'll see. That will probably blow up. I'm not super optimistic about this, but at least that gets us started, right? We can refine the test as we go. And so all this code here is basically making sure that when I call register user, I end up with a user in the database. So again, I'm just gonna focus on the happy path. I'm not gonna check uniqueness stuff, etc., etc. But and so the last thing I want, once I've got my results, first to make sure that there is no error when I run the transaction function. So I'm gonna be a bit lazy, do something like this here. Transaction should run, should successfully run or something. And then I can finally start to check that expect, I don't know. So we've got this result. which are probably going to be renamed like persisted user or something. And oh yeah, I need to, of course, it's an interface, right? Because the Golang driver cannot know in advance what the type is going to be. So it has to, because of the lack of generics, it has to say it's an interface, right? So it's a super type. So can I do something like this? Hopefully, yes. That's my persisted user actually. So let me go back to result and persisted user. Okay, here we go. So I should get a pointer to a user because I don't want to copy the structs all over the place. And then I can finally write, so what? The email is probably a safe bet, should probably be the same as the other email. So I'm going to be a bit consistent. I started with username, I think. And for now, and I'm going to refine the test afterwards, I'm just going to make sure that the email is not nil, the password, sorry. But what we're going to do instead is check that it actually matches the initial password. But for now, let's just be a bit sloppy and say it's not nil. We will go back to the test. You know, it's not. It's maybe not the most academic way of doing TDD here. I'm a bit sloppy and doing back and forth between my implementation and test, but hopefully we'll get to a point where the test fully expresses what I want, which is I call register, the user ends up in the database, the password is encrypted and salted, and I can check that it matches the initial password. So that part I'm gonna leave it for a bit later. If it's not during this live stream, it will be next week, no worries. But for now, I mostly want to give you a feel of the driver, which we already did a little bit in the test and we'll do again in the implementation. So last thing here, obviously doesn't compile yet. Why? Because my struct, my user Neo4j repository does not implement the interface, this interface. And so the way to do it in Golang, the way to implement an interface is to define your receiving struct as a receiver of all the functions declaring that interface. So I don't know if it's very clear. It's probably clearer if I show it rather than try to explain it. And luckily, there is a shortcut in Golang for that. I can say, please implement, if I can type, which is definitely not a given today. Please implement this, and it will automatically, and I'd rather use a pointer, because again, I don't want to copy, especially this object, which might be a bit heavyweight. So pointer makes sure that we do not copy structs, we just reference them. So now, obviously, I'm implementing all the functions declared in that interface. Therefore, user Neo4j repository implements that interface. So it's not explicit as in Java, C# or the languages. It's mostly through, you know, this kind of duck typing approach, where if you implement some functions, then you end up being an implementer of an interface, which happens with the close, remember? With the close utility we wrote, right? It works on session, it works on driver, because they both have a no-arg close method, because the interface is just this. So as long as you have any class, any type that defines this function, then implicitly you will be an implementation of the closer interface, which is quite nice most of the time, because you can then write some generic utility here. I mean, generic, not the generic sense, but generic in the term, you can apply it to many types. So what's going on here? Register user could return an error. I type user. Oh yeah. So I will do a slight change to the interface because I'd rather use a pointer. And here you see I broke, so I changed the contract, and so there is no implementation link between them until I fix this, and now it's back. So that's the first thing. And here, there could be an error when I try to register user, so let me be sloppy and write this. user should be registered. So if I recap, so far we've done the test, which is a good halfway. I mean, almost. Again, we will come back to the password matching. What do we have here? We have a Neo4j container that starts at the beginning of the test. We instantiate a driver. We instantiate my repository that will use this driver. Then I've got a user, and I checked at the end that the user ends up in the database. So quite a lot of code for the test. I will obviously, if I start a new one, move some common parts in before each, after each, which I already did here. You know, I already start the container in before each and stop it at the end. So that's the benefit of using Ginkgo instead of the standard governor, where it's just flat. You just have a sequence of tests. There is no hooks like this. So Ginkgo for the test structure, Gomega for the matchers. And yeah, so let's run the test. Let's see. So currently I'm focusing on only this test. So only this one should run in the whole package. Let's see what happens. Oh, and yeah, remember, I changed this to be a pointer. So yeah, let's fix the compilation and rerun. And same problem here. In my previous test I wanted to have this fake, so a kind of mock, just a low-tech mock, so to say. In my it's at the HTTP level, at the controller level, I just put a fake, and that just returns nil, because I was mocking basically the whole Neo4j part. But then I also had to update the signature, otherwise it would not implement it, so that wouldn't work. So now, hopefully, we are rid of all the compilation errors. And so the container starts, then the test will blow up, because obviously what my implementation does currently at the repository level is just panic. Boom, implement me. All right. I mean, it's asking so nicely that I have to implement it, right? It's so polite with me. So, all right. Cool. Very cool. So what must we do? We have a driver, which is the good news, because that's not something you want to instantiate every time you need to run a query. Just, I think the guideline is to instantiate a driver for the lifetime of your application, I would say. So let's get started. So I have this receiver here, so I can access the driver through the receiver, and then start my work. So it's you know, very similar to what we've done so far. So I just want a new session. For now, I'm gonna be giving an empty. We could have a look. You know, yeah, there is all these things. I can look access mode write, access mode read. So yeah, you know what? Let's not be as sloppy as before, and maybe start this. So access mode. What was it? Access mode. Neo4j access mode. Neo4j access mode write. Nice. So yeah, I'm at least gonna use this. I don't need bookmarks or anything like this at this point. Database name, I'm just gonna use a default one for now. I'm not gonna use a multi-database feature that got published in Neo4j4. I've got my session. I could get an error. As usual, if there is an error, what do? We return the error. Or we could wrap it, you know, with a Golang 1.13. You can wrap errors, and you can access to the wrapped error later on if you want. For now, again, doing the minimal. I don't want to dilute the whole stream in technical details. Then, next thing to do is close the session. However, it could fail. So I could use something. I could use something like this. And yeah, so this time I'm using another trick, which is named exit parameters. So in that case, if there is an error, I'm gonna, at the last minute, because defer will run when the scope, so the function here, ends. So I'm gonna do this. So what's gonna happen is that if there is an error closing the session, it will be assigned to the output parameter here. So it will be properly seen by the callers. That's another way to do it. Let me know your thoughts on this. I've not used this pattern very much. I don't really like named parameters. I mean, named output parameters in general, but yeah, in that specific case, it could be handy. And so, okay, I'm closing my session when I'm done, making sure there returns the error if there is something wrong. And then, as usual. So I could use session.run, but again, we don't want to do that. We really want to do transaction work. So let's do this. So it will automatically manage the transaction boundary for me as well. Give me the transaction, it starts for me, and then I just have to run stuff in it. And in that case, I'm just gonna create, I'm not gonna return anything, so there could be an error. So let's do the outer part first. And I could, yeah, I actually probably don't care much. So I'm just gonna combine it in a single if. That's something you can do as well, with the drawback that this, if I had a result here, I could only access it in an else clause, not after the if. But here I don't really care. So return error. All right. Yeah, it's not happy. So just to make sure I'm on the right track. Okay, compiles. And let's move this here a little bit. And sorry about that, I'm gonna sneeze a bit. Oh. Okay, now I'm back on track. And what I can do is maybe do something like, I don't know, versus user. So in the TX, I don't want to have a giant block of code right here. And here it's still a method because it's a function with a receiver, but it's private, right? It's only for convenience. So all the work is gonna be done here. And otherwise, at the end of this function, I should return nil because nothing happens, right? So let's continue. Let's continue, and oh my god, so much space taken on my screen. It's getting a bit challenging, but anyway. So what I want to do, let's do the basic thing first. So I can call run on the transaction directly. And let's see what the query will be. The map, that's my parameters here. My query will be something, and I will run it. The result, I don't really care. And I can just, do this. That should be hopefully enough. That's more or less the idea. I don't really care about the results because I'm not planning on returning anything from the query. And if there is an error, or if there is none, then I will return an error, and if there is nil or not, but that should work. So what do I want to do? Let's see, I want to create a user. So I want to create a user who's gonna get, it's gonna be very similar to the query we wrote in the test, except this time it's a right query. I want an email. I want a username. And I want a password. And that should do it. Okay, cool. Which means that I need 3 matching parameters. So email, which will be our dear user .email. Then I will need username, which will be the username, and finally password. And password, I don't want to store it as is. It wouldn't be very nice to do it. And to be honest, I'm just gonna follow. I can share the link in the chat. So I'm gonna follow. I'm just pasting it in the chat as well. This blog post, which looked very nice, and using the standard bcrypt algorithm, which is built in the Go standard library. So basically, I'm gonna hash it. I'm gonna hash the password, and Oh yeah, you know what? Actually, I'm gonna store it as a string. I said byte array, so maybe the test will blow up because of this, but let's call it hash user dot password. And hash doesn't really need to be a method, right? I don't need any of the attributes of the user Neo4j repository. So I'm just gonna do a simple private function here that will return me. Yeah, okay. Let's say a string. Let's say a string. So what we can do here is use the bcrypt package, and we can do something like generate from password. We can give it the byte array of the password and the cost. So, bcrypt can be configured to, be slower to compute, faster to compute, etc., etc. Usually the slower to compute, the better. But then you also need to balance that with, the API responsiveness, etc. Because if it takes 3 hours to hash a password, your user probably won't waste 3 hours for their account creation to be confirmed. So, you need to be balanced between security and convenience, I would say. Maybe security experts here will freak out when I say that, but for now, I'm just gonna, there is a min cost, a max cost. I'm probably gonna pick the default cost right now. I'm no security expert. Maybe that's not the best setting to pick. Hopefully, the Golang implementers have done a good job picking a default, and it's a valuable one. So what happens here? I got hash, but I got an error. Oh no. Okay, so there could be an error. My bad. Hash password. And then not only that, but possibly an error, and by convention, errors are on the right, which is a bit surprising to me, by the way, because on Scala, for instance, there is a play word with error, which is usually on the left, because an error is not right. But in Golang, it's the contrary, so I don't know. That's a bit strange to me, but maybe I'm the only one finding it strange. Anyway, moving on. So I also need to check here if there is an error, which probably won't happen. So that's not TDD to the letter here. It's not academic TDD because I'm already writing some guards that I'm not testing. But just to give you a sense of what the real implementation looks like, even if it's not 100% test driven. So I've got this, all right. So if there is an error, let's return an empty password and the error, else we're just gonna return the string. I could use byte array actually. I'm not completely decided yet. I'm just gonna go with string because it's convenient right now. But as you know, node and relationship attributes support the byte array type. So I really don't know what's best for now. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. But yeah, I'm gonna go with that. And so no new variable. Oh yeah, sure. So let's do just this. And let's see what happens. The test probably won't pass directly. And at least for one reason, so I'm gonna try to fix it first. I decided it would be a byte array, but you know what, it's just gonna be a string. So I don't need this cast here. Let's see what happens. So just let me have a last look. Register user, what do? I open a session and say it's explicitly a write session. If there is an issue opening the session, I return the error, stop there. Otherwise, I also, if there is no error, make sure to close the session before the function terminates. Then I declare a transaction function, and then I call the persist user private method, which does all the heavy lifting of running the query with parameters, hashing the password, etc., etc. So let's see where that leads me. Maybe it's going to be an epic failure. Hopefully it should kind of pass, I hope. So as usual, starting the containers I need, because I actually need a database to test against. And let's see. Ooh, failure, which is not completely surprising. Parameter missing, expected parameters, username, email, parse through, client error, parameter missing. So I've got an error. I missed a parameter. Where does that happen? So let me see. What am I missing? Oops. Only this. expected parameters, username and emails. What's going on? That's the joy of live streams. You've got live errors and sometimes you're not sure what's going wrong. So it's complaining about the lack of parameters, although I use them. I don't know. Do I need to do this instead? I think it should be more or less the same. That's a bit strange. So let me have a look. I've got this transaction, this match and return. I've got two parameters. Yeah, let's see. At least it seems the query in the implementation, not in the test, seems to run fine. So that's already encouraging. Even if there is a string. Oh, yeah, my bad. I forgot to quote the keys. Oh yeah, so of course, of course, obviously, if I don't quote, then it refers to the variables, and then it will be the value and not the name of username. So that would be nonsense. Okay, yeah, of course, very sloppy on my part. Sorry about that. And the test pass, that's great, except it's not completely there yet, because I also want to check that I don't store just any random passwords, but the password that matches the initial password. And luckily, I know the initial password here. So let's do this. So there, I have this initial password, and I'm just gonna do something like expect, I don't know, password matches, passwords match, maybe rather. Initial password, this password, and something like to be true. I don't know how that sounds to you, people. Hopefully that's okay. And we'll probably stop there when because we have what, 8 minutes left. Yeah, sounds like a good. Ideally, I would stop with a failing test, but maybe not today. And I don't know why it infers two return types. I just want Boolean, whether it's true or not. If there is an error, I will anyway. Yeah, bool. Sorry. Language confusions. So password, yeah, password 1, password 2. Why not? And what happens here, or maybe just to be a bit less ambiguous, there is initial password and there is a hashed password. Maybe that makes more sense. Trying to be kind to my future self if I ever read this code. So because yeah, my future self knows where I live, so rather be careful. Okay, so and now I'm still checking the same blog post I sent in the chat, because I don't use the bcrypt APIs every day. So I've got the generate password we've done, and that's cool, but now I want to verify password. And it's called step 4 in the blog post I mentioned, and I'm reading it as well. So there is something like compare hash and passwords. That looks great. So let's see. Bcrypt, not generate this time, compared hash and passwords. So I've got the hashed password, yay, almost the same name as the parameters I picked, I'm happy. And so yeah, I just need to convert them to byte arrays. Initial password, I guess, yes. And what does it give me? It gives me an error. Okay, that's okay. If there is an error, then it's wrong. So what I want to do is something like it matches if there is no error. Something like this. So let's see if the test still passes. If yes, that's great. We're mostly done, I believe, with our first API, which is great news. Let's see. So let's wait a little bit. Again, I can see it's a bit slow, even if my machine has quite good hardware specs. And it passes. Great. So now we're sure that we are not storing garbage. We're storing the actual user information, and we hash the password with bcrypt and not MD5 or kind of old algorithms that can be cracked very easily. So that looks good to me. Nice. However, if we have a look, let's look at our HTTP controller just to be sure it's not completely, it's not incomplete at least. So what do? I read the request body, unmarshal the request body to a registration request, which is basically a user with 3 keys that we've seen, calling the repository, ignoring the error, so it's not great, but we can test that later because it's not that interesting to test. I mean, it is important to test, but in a live stream, sorry, it's not interesting. It's not really interesting. You all know at this point how to write tests, and you probably knew that before anyway. Cool, so that part looks complete enough to me. However, here, my main function doesn't do much on the /users endpoint. So I should probably give it this user handler instead. So let me see. How do I do that? So I need a user handler which gives a path, which has a path and a dependency, which is user repository. So here I'm not gonna test drive it. I mean, I could, but it's, you know, lot of time for little value in a live stream. So let's do this. So I need a user handler. What is the path? The path is // I cannot really type. And then I need the actual user repository. So let's do this one. And I need a driver. So here I need a driver. And I would ideally, yeah, let's be sloppy and create a function here that gives me a user handler. Then I can use something like this. And hopefully, if I'm not mistaken, I can do user handler. Yeah, it should hopefully be okay. Yes, cool. So now the last part is to configure the driver. So ideally, we don't want to hard code any credentials or anything. So we want something like Neo4j new driver with a specific target that can come from the environment. So I'm just gonna, for now, target string. Just gonna do this. And then, you know what? I'm just gonna do token. So yeah, my driver function has actually no value. Why is it complaining? Too many arguments to return. Oh yeah, because it would fail. Here I'm in the main method, so I can be a bit sloppy with error handling, or a bit more brutal, so to say. If there is an error, I could panic directly, because I cannot really do anything else. I mean, if the database is dead, so be it. I could be a bit more resilient, maybe a retry, and you know, it could also happen in the middle of the lifetime of the application, so we could be a bit smarter about this. I don't feel like being smart right now, so I'm not gonna be smart. So yeah, just gonna do something that you should do with a lot of care. Don't use that too much. But here, yeah, let's just go forward. Okay, so there is some added value to my function, which hides the error, basically panics. And here I would need, so the targets, I can do the env lookup, I think. Let me check. I think it's OS lookup env or something. Yeah. So I will use, I don't know, let's be real imaginative, Neo4j URI. So Neo4j URI, found. And so if not found, again, gonna be sloppy here, panic. Something like this, not set. I will do for now the same with the username. I could extract a function at some point. And the password. Yeah, I will definitely extract a function afterwards. Oh, it's already 1 hour, so I'm just gonna be real quick about this, hopefully, and not introduce any bug. And then we will see later, we will see in the next live stream whether that main method works. But hopefully, if I do this, And this, I need the target, which is Neo4j URI, and then the Neo4j auth token. And okay. Oh, well, sorry, I cannot type. I'm trying. The more I try to hurry, the more I fail. So I think it's auth token or something. I forgot. I did it just before, but real quick. Yeah, so not this one. Basic auth. Yes, that's the one I was looking for. Come on. Yes, thank you. Neo4j username, Neo4j password. So at least it's not hard-coded. You can configure easily in any cloud provider, etc., etc. And real for now, I'm just gonna skip it entirely. So at this point, hopefully, once I run it with the right credentials, etc., so I can use Neo4j desktop, I can use another Neo4j container if I want to. I can see it live. But that will be the next thing we'll do in the next live stream. And yeah, we'll probably try maybe to implement another API, or if you have other ideas that you would like me to show with the Golang driver, please let me know. I'm happy to take suggestions as well. And yeah, so thanks a lot for following this hour of coding. Hope you learned a few things. I learned a few things, definitely. And yeah, so I will see you next week at the same time. See ya. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.